Jisoo wandered through the narrow streets of Insadong, her eyes tracing the colorful patterns of the traditional hanboks displayed in the shop windows. It was her favorite part of the city, an escape from the towering skyscrapers and the rush of modern Seoul. She paused at a small stall selling handmade trinkets. Among them was a bracelet with a single red thread and a tiny silver heart dangling from it. As she reached out to touch it, a voice interrupted. It said to connect two people destined to meet. Jisoo turned to see a young man, his eyes warm and his smile gentle. "Is that so?" she asked, intrigued by both the story and the stranger. He nodded. "My grandmother used to tell me that if two people wear it, their paths will always cross." Jisoo's lips curved into a smile. "Sounds like a fairy tale." "Maybe," he shrugged. "But who doesn't like a bit of magic in this busy city?" The man introduced himself as Miho. He was visiting Seoul for the first time in years after studying abroad. For the next few minutes, they talked about the city's hidden gems, temples, street food stalls, and secret gardens only locals knew. Jisoo felt an instant connection. It was as if they had known each other for much longer than the few minutes they'd spoken. Before they parted, Miho insisted on buying the bracelet for her. "As a memory of today," he said. "And maybe, if the legend is true, we'll meet again." Jisoo's heart fluttered as she accepted it. "I'll take your word for it." Days turned into weeks, and despite Seoul's vastness, Jisoo found herself thinking of Miho often. She wore the bracelet, its tiny heart resting on her wrist as a reminder of their brief encounter. But as time passed, she began to doubt she'd ever see him again. One rainy evening, Jisoo found herself taking shelter under a cafe awning, the neon lights of the city blurred by the raindrops. She glanced at her phone. She was supposed to meet her friends, but the storm had delayed her. Just as she sighed, thinking of how endless Seoul felt without someone to share it with, she spotted a familiar face across the street. It was Miho, holding an umbrella and looking just as surprised as she was. Jisoo felt a jolt of excitement as she waved, and he crossed the street, his steps quickening as if he, too, had been hoping for this moment. "I knew we'd meet again," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "Maybe your grandmother's story has some truth to it after all," Jisoo teased, but her voice held a hint of nervousness. "Or maybe Seoul isn't as big as it seems." Miho's eyes twinkled. "Or maybe some things are just meant to be." They spent the evening exploring the city together, sharing stories and laughter as the rain subsided, leaving behind the fresh scent of wet pavement and blooming flowers. Under the glow of lanterns by the Han River, Jisoo felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in a long time. She realized that Seoul didn't feel quite as lonely anymore. Weeks later, Miho and Jisoo found themselves at the very spot they'd first met, in front of the same trinket stall. "It's funny, isn't it?" Miho said as he held her hand. "How one chance encounter can change everything." Jisoo squeezed his hand gently. "Maybe it wasn't just chance. Maybe it was that bit of magic you mentioned." He smiled and pulled out a matching bracelet, the twin to hers, from his pocket. "I think it's time I wore one too. After all, if we're destined to keep meeting, I want to make sure I'm always on the right path." Jisoo's eyes sparkled as she helped him tie the bracelet around his wrist. "To always finding each other," she whispered. As they stood together, hand in hand, beneath the cherry blossoms fluttering in the breeze, Jisoo knew one thing for sure. Sometimes, the heart knows its way, even in the vastness of a city like Seoul.